the silent invasion. The morning mist rolled through Pine Ridge Valley like a gentle ghost, covering the small farming town in its ethereal embrace. Jackson Torres stood on his porch, steam rising from his coffee mug as he surveyed the land that had become his sanctuary. After 15 years serving as a Marine Force recon operator in hostile territories across 3 continents, this peaceful valley in Montana had called to him. The population barely reached 2,000 souls, most of them farmers, ranchers, and people seeking the quiet life away from the chaos of cities. Jackson had chosen Pine Ridge precisely because nothing ever happened here. The biggest excitement last year had been when old Bill Anderson's prize bull had broken through a fence and wandered into the town square during the harvest festival. But that morning, as Jackson watched the sun pierce through the mist, something felt different. It was a feeling he had learned to trust during countless missions in enemy territory. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The first sign of trouble had started 3 weeks ago. Ranchers began reporting missing cattle. Not 1 or 2, which might be explained by predators or thieves, but entire groups of 20 or 30 head vanishing without a trace. No blood, no tracks, no broken fences. The animals simply disappeared between sunset and sunrise, leaving behind only confused ranchers and empty pastures. The local sheriff, Dale Morrison, had filed reports with the state police, but they dismissed it as sophisticated cattle rustling. Jackson knew better. He had seen the aftermath of these disappearances himself when his neighbor's entire flock of sheep had vanished. The grass where they had been wasn't even disturbed. No vehicle tracks led to or from the area. It was as if something had lifted them straight up into the sky. That thought should have been ridiculous, but Jackson had learned long ago that the universe held more mysteries than most people were comfortable acknowledging. He finished his coffee and headed into town. Pine Ridge's main street stretched for only 4 blocks, lined with family-owned shops that had been there for generations. The hardware store, the diner, the small grocery market, and a handful of other establishments that served the rural community. As Jackson parked his truck outside Miller's Diner, he noticed several other vehicles he recognized. Inside, he found exactly who he expected. Diana Walsh sat in a corner booth, her laptop open despite the fact that the diner's ancient Wi-Fi barely functioned. She had been an intelligence analyst for the Navy before retiring to Pine Ridge to write mystery novels. Across from her sat Robert Kim, former Army Special Forces medic who now ran the town's small clinic. At the counter, nursing black coffee, was Viktor Petrov, an immigrant from Russia who claimed to be a retired electrician, but whose scarred hands and sharp eyes suggested a more violent past. They all looked up as Jackson entered. Without a word, he joined them at the booth. Diana turned her laptop screen toward him. She had been mapping the disappearances, creating a pattern analysis that would have impressed his old intelligence officers. The incidents formed a perfect grid, each point exactly 5 kilometers from the next. The pattern was expanding outward from a central point in the mountains north of town. Robert leaned forward, his voice low. My son was camping up near Eagle Peak last weekend. He came back talking about strange lights in the sky. Said they moved, in ways that didn't make sense, stopping and starting instantly, making 90-degree turns at speeds that should have torn any aircraft apart. Victor added his own observation. The radio frequencies have been acting strange. I still monitor certain channels from my old life. There is interference, but not random. It has patterns like communication, but using frequencies we don't normally use. Diana pulled up another file on her laptop. I've been tracking satellite imagery of our area. Look at this. She showed them a series of images taken over the past month. In each one, there were gaps in the coverage, perfect circles where the satellites seemed unable to capture any data. Something is blocking our surveillance satellites from seeing certain areas. That technology doesn't exist, at least not officially. Jackson studied the data, his mind automatically shifting into tactical mode. They're reconnaissance patterns. Someone or something is mapping our area, cataloging resources and population. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. In Force Recon, we'd do the same thing before an operation. Map everything, identify threats, locate resources. The Others exchanged glances. The unspoken conclusion hung in the air between them. If these were reconnaissance patterns, then what came next was obvious. Pine Ridge Valley wasn't experiencing cattle rustling. It was being studied, evaluated, and prepared for something much worse. That night, Jackson couldn't sleep. He sat on his roof with night vision goggles he had kept from his service days, scanning the sky. Around 2 a.m, his patience was rewarded. 3 objects appeared above the mountains, moving in perfect synchronization. They emitted no sound, no heat signature that his equipment could detect. They moved across the valley in a search pattern, methodical and thorough. As he watched, one of the objects descended toward the Hendricks Ranch 2 miles away. Jackson grabbed his rifle and truck keys, but by the time he reached the property, he was too late. 40 head of prime beef cattle were gone, but this time there was evidence. Pressed into the soft earth near the water trough were prints unlike anything Jackson had ever seen. They were roughly humanoid but wrong in every way. Too many joints in what should be fingers, a stride pattern that suggested a creature at least 7 feet tall, but weighing far less than it should. Jackson took photos and samples of a strange, silvery residue left on a fence post. As he worked, his phone buzzed with messages. Diana, Robert, Victor, and others were reporting similar sightings across the valley. The reconnaissance phase was escalating. Whatever had been studying Pine Ridge was getting bolder, less concerned about leaving evidence. The next morning, Jackson called a meeting at his ranch. To his surprise, over 30 people showed up. As he looked around the room, he realized something that made his blood run cold and his heart swell with pride simultaneously. Pine Ridge Valley might look like a sleepy farming town, but it was full of wolves in sheep's clothing. Besides his small group, there was Catherine Chen, a retired Air Force pilot, James Crow Feather, a former Army Ranger and member of the Blackfeet Nation, Maria Santos, who had served as a combat engineer in Iraq. The list went on. Pine Ridge had become a retirement community for warriors, men and women who had served their country and now just wanted peace. But warriors never truly stopped being warriors. They just learned to hide it better. As Jackson looked at the assembled group, he saw the same recognition dawning on their faces. Whatever was coming for Pine Ridge had made a critical error. They had mistaken quiet for weak, peaceful for helpless. Catherine spoke first. "I've been in touch with some old contacts. Whatever's blocking our satellites isn't from any terrestrial source. The energy signatures are all wrong." She paused, making sure everyone understood the implication. "We're not dealing with foreign agents or some black ops program. This is something else." James added his own intelligence. "My grandfather used to tell stories about sky people who would come and take from the earth. I always thought they were just legends, but he described lights exactly like what we're seeing now. This has happened before, long ago." The room fell silent as the reality settled in. Pine Ridge Valley was facing something beyond conventional understanding, but as Jackson looked around the room at the assembled veterans, he saw no fear, only determination. These people had faced impossible odds before in deserts, jungles, and mountains across the world. They had learned that the impossible was just another mission parameter to overcome. Victor stood up, his Russian accent thick with emotion. "In Stalingrad, my grandfather fought against an enemy everyone said was unbeatable. He told me that the secret was simple. You don't need to be stronger than your enemy. You just need to be more stubborn than they expect." He looked around the room. "Whatever these things are, they expect farmers and shepherds. They will find something very different." As the meeting concluded, assignments were distributed. Diana would coordinate intelligence gathering. Robert would prepare medical supplies and treatment protocols for potential casualties. Victor would work on hardening their electronics against interference. Catherine would establish observation posts and early warning systems. James would scout the mountain approaches and identify defensive positions. Jackson himself would do what he did best: turn a collection of individual warriors into a cohesive fighting force. As the group dispersed to their tasks, he remained behind, staring at the map of Pine Ridge Valley spread across his table. Somewhere above them, perhaps beyond the atmosphere itself, an enemy was preparing to move against his home. They had spent weeks studying Pine Ridge, learning its patterns and weaknesses, but they had failed to learn the most important thing about this quiet valley. They had failed to discover that Pine Ridge was where America's warriors came to rest, and there was nothing more dangerous than threatening a warrior's peace. The aliens, whatever they were, had chosen their target based on isolation and vulnerability. They were about to learn that they had chosen the worst possible place on Earth to start their invasion. The awakening of warriors. The attack came 3 nights later, exactly as Jackson had predicted. At 0200 hours, every electronic device in Pine Ridge Valley died simultaneously. The electromagnetic pulse was precise, surgical, designed to cripple human technology without damaging biological tissue. Streetlights winked out, vehicles wouldn't start, and cell phones became useless bricks of plastic and silicon. To most populations, this would have been the beginning of panic and chaos. But Pine Ridge was not most populations. The moment the ETE lights died, prearranged protocols activated. Veterans across the valley moved to predetermined positions using mechanical watches and chemical light sticks that were immune to EMP effects. Diana's intelligence network had done its job well. They knew the attack patterns of their enemy, identified from weeks of observation. The aliens moved in groups of 8, used the high ground for observation, and seemed to rely heavily on their technological superiority. Jackson stood in his barn, now converted into a command post lit by oil lamps. Around him, his core team, prepared for what was coming. They had raided every military surplus store within 300 miles, gathering equipment that would function without electronics. Maps covered every surface, marked with defensive positions and fallback points. Pine Ridge might look helpless, but it was about to become a fortress. The first alien craft descended toward the town square, its sleek hull reflecting the moonlight, like liquid mercury. It landed silently in front of the courthouse, and 8 figures emerged. They stood 7 feet tall, with elongated limbs that moved with an insect-like precision. Their heads were oversized, dominated by large black eyes that seemed to absorb light. They carried weapons that looked like crystalline rifles, probably energy-based given their technological level. The aliens moved toward the courthouse, clearly expecting to find a town paralyzed by fear and confusion. Instead, they found Catherine Chen standing in the middle of the street, appearing to be just a frightened middle-aged woman in farming clothes. She stumbled toward them, hands raised, playing the part of a terrified civilian perfectly. The aliens relaxed slightly, lowering their weapons. It was the last mistake they would make. The moment the lead alien was within range, Catherine's facade dropped. Years of combat training took over as she drew the concealed .45 pistol from under her jacket and put 2 round center mass into the nearest creature. To everyone's surprise, the bullets worked. The alien's advanced suit might have been designed for energy weapons, but it couldn't stop good old-fashioned lead. The creature fell backward, dark blue blood pooling beneath it. The other 7 aliens raised their weapons, but Pine Ridge had learned from every guerrilla war America had ever fought. Crossfire erupted from concealed positions as veterans opened, up with hunting rifles, shotguns, and recovered military weapons. The aliens' energy weapons were powerful, turning sections of buildings into molten slag, but they required time to aim and charge. The humans' kinetic weapons were primitive but instantaneous. In 90 seconds, the first alien squad was eliminated, but this was just the beginning. Across the valley, more craft were landing, deploying troops in what was clearly meant to be an overwhelming show of force. The aliens had expected to round up a helpless population for whatever purpose they had planned. Instead, they found themselves in a nightmare of coordinated resistance. At the Hendricks Ranch, James Crowfeather had turned the barn into a kill box. When an alien squad entered searching for humans to capture, he triggered improvised explosive devices made from fertilizer and diesel fuel. The explosion took out half the squad instantly. The survivors stumbled out to find James and 5 other veterans waiting with overlapping fields of fire. Not one alien escaped. Near the mountains, Victor had prepared something special. Using his knowledge of electronics and some creative engineering, he had converted several old microwave ovens into directed energy weapons. When an alien patrol moved through a canyon pass, Victor's team activated their devices. The concentrated microwave energy didn't kill the aliens, but it overloaded their suits' systems, leaving them vulnerable to conventional weapons. The aliens attempted to regroup, pulling back to establish a perimeter around their landing craft. But Robert Kim had studied their physiology from the one Catherine had killed. Their blood chemistry suggested a vulnerability to certain common chemicals. Within hours, he had created improvised gas grenades using ammonia and bleach. The chemical weapons might have been banned in human warfare, but no one had signed any treaties with these invaders. As dawn approached, the tide of battle had shifted completely. The aliens had landed 12 craft and deployed 96 soldiers into Pine Ridge Valley. 60 were dead, 20 more were wounded, and the survivors were trapped in defensive positions around their ships. But the humans knew this was just the first wave. Diana's analysis suggested this was a scouting force, preparing the way for a larger invasion. Jackson gathered his lieutenants in the command post. They were bloodied but victorious, yet everyone knew this was just the beginning. "They'll come back with more," Catherine said, cleaning her rifle. "And they'll adapt to our tactics." "Let them come," Victor responded, his eyes hard. "We have shown them that Earth is not defenseless. Even if they defeat Pine Ridge, the world now knows they can be killed." But Jackson had a different plan. Among the alien equipment they had captured was a communication device. Diana had been working on it throughout the night, and she believed she had figured out how to operate it. "If we can send a message back to their fleet," she explained, "we might be able to end this before it escalates." The group spent the next hour crafting their message. It was simple, direct, and backed by video evidence of the night's battle. The message was broadcast on all channels the device could access. "This is Pine Ridge Valley, Earth. 2 approaching. Fleet. Your scouting force has been neutralized. You believed you were attacking a defenseless agricultural settlement. You were wrong. This valley contains 300 military veterans representing Earth's combined combat experience of over 4,000 years. We are teachers, doctors, farmers, and neighbors. But we are also rangers, Marines, special forces, SEALs, and warriors from every branch of human military service. Pine Ridge is not unique. Every nation on Earth has communities like ours. Quiet, places where warriors rest but never forget how to fight. Your technology is superior, but technology alone does not win wars. We have been fighting each other for 10,000 years. We have perfected the art of warfare in ways you cannot imagine. Your scouts thought they were studying sheep. They were actually counting wolves. If you proceed with your invasion, you will not face farmers and civilians. You will face 8 billion humans who have spent their entire evolutionary history becoming better at killing. We do not seek war with you, but we excel at it. Pine Ridge Valley was your test. You failed. Choose your next action carefully." The message was sent just as the sun fully rose over Pine Ridge Valley. The surviving aliens were allowed to retreat to their craft and leave, carrying their dead and wounded. It was important they returned to their fleet with the story of what had happened here. Sometimes the best victory was the battle that didn't need to be fought. For 3 days, the world held its breath. The story of Pine Ridge's defense had spread globally within hours. Military forces mobilized, but more importantly, communities everywhere began to organize. Veterans trained civilians, engineers hardened infrastructure against EMP attacks, and chemists worked on weapons that could pierce alien defenses. Humanity might have been divided by borders and politics, but faced with an external threat, they remembered how to stand together. On the 4th day, a single alien craft returned to Pine Ridge. It landed in the same spot where the first attack had begun. A lone figure emerged, this one clearly different from the soldiers. It wore elaborate robes instead of armor and carried no weapons. Through the captured communication device, it transmitted in heavily accented but understandable English. "I am Ambassador Zelrix of the Hegemony Collective. We acknowledge Pine Ridge Valley's message. We have miscalculated. Your species was evaluated as pre-stellar, non-unified, and suitable for integration into our expansion protocol. This evaluation was in error." The alien paused, its large eyes surveying the armed humans who had emerged from cover. The hegemony seeks resources and territory, but we are not foolish. The cost of subduing your world would exceed any benefit. Pine Ridge Valley has demonstrated that humanity would be a poor choice for forced integration. Jackson stepped forward, representing not just Pine Ridge, but, in that moment, all of Earth. Then we have an understanding. The ambassador's head tilted in what might have been a nod. We will mark your system as hostile to harvesting. No hegemony ship will return. But know this, humans of Earth. The galaxy is vast and full of species that view young worlds as opportunities. You have won this day not through technology, but through warrior spirit. If you wish to survive what comes next, you must grow beyond your single world. As the alien craft lifted off and disappeared into the morning sky, Jackson felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Pine Ridge Valley had saved Earth not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through the simple fact that humans had spent their entire existence perfecting the art of conflict. It was both humanity's greatest weakness and, as proven today, its hidden strength. In the weeks that followed, Pine Ridge Valley became a symbol of human resistance and ingenuity. Military advisors from around the world came to study the battle, to learn how a small farming town had defeated a technologically superior foe. But the veterans of Pine Ridge had a simpler explanation. They had won because the aliens had made the same mistake many enemies throughout history had made. They had confused quiet with weak, peaceful with harmless. The universe had learned an important lesson about Earth. Humans might be young in cosmic terms, primitive in technology, and divided among themselves. But they were also the descendants of countless generations who had survived through conflict, adaptation, and sheer stubborn refusal to surrender. The galaxy might be full of advanced species, but none of them had spent 10,000 years turning warfare into an art form. Pine Ridge Valley returned to its peaceful existence, but with one major change. The town now hosted a training center where veterans taught others the lessons learned from the brief invasion. The motto above the entrance read, "Here, rest warriors, disturb at your peril." The message was clear to any future visitors from the stars. Earth might look like easy prey, full of primitive beings barely able to leave their own planet. But appearances could be deceiving, because on Earth, even the quiet farming towns were full of dangerous warriors, just waiting for someone foolish enough to awaken them.